Why I feel in the face of all the problems in the world impotent, and why I somehow cannot manage to transform I. Now here we get to the real problem, because we're always telling each other that we should be different. Now I'm not going to tell you that tonight. Why not? Because I know you can't. Nor can I. That may sound depressing, but I'll tell you it isn't. It's very hard. But everybody, you see, who is at all sensitive and awake to their own problems and human problems is trying to change himself. We know we can't change the world unless we change ourselves. So when we are aware of the...
So, a lot of mixed feelings on today's Bitcoin chart. We've had quite the parabolic trend. And really, when seeing these kinds of, I would go as far to say, irrational moves, it can be tempting to fall victim to the greater fool fallacy, where you always believe someone is going to be more of an idiot than you are and buy above where you bought. And that's fine and healthy as long as you have a defined sustainable trend that actually follows the rules of volatility theory in terms of mass generation and compression. Now, when you have a move like this, you generate so much mass so quickly, and you expand all these periods all at once, that as the expansion is occurring, your mean reversion pivots are still miles away from anything that could potentially be seen as a trending pivot. So when you're in these kinds of scenarios attempting to find out exactly where the high is going to be on Bitcoin, it's going to take a lot more effort and a lot more focus to actually ensure that your entries are safe, right? And really, attempting a short at all right now, despite having a fantastic profit ratio, just simply isn't worth the risk. And the same is true for a long position as well. So, even though we've missed out a majority of this move, right? Even though we called the bottom on this date, December 16th, feel free to check in my YouTube channel, watch the video on December 16th. We did call the bottom for Bitcoin, but I will say we did take profit much too soon because we expected a long-term compressing range to actually allow Bitcoin to shed its excessive distributional width. So, what kind of game plan do I recommend at this time while we wait out whatever this is? I guess me saying wait out is a pretty good indicator of where my current bias is. Well, we can't have any bullish positions. You would never want to long while tagging the 3.2 standard deviation, right? If you have a value that is already at excessive distributional width and you're tagging the value that's 99.8% of the data, I would very much recommend assuming that you're going to go into the last 0.02%. So, with this in mind, we will see a retrace eventually. And what's good about this is that when you have these sort of huge sustained moves like so, like we're seeing here in both instances, there is very good news in the fact that these moves have very long-term compressionary periods, right? When we had the significant downtrend from earlier in the crash pattern, right? All this here, this madness in late December, that's good. Why? Because it generates a predictable compressing range. And if you have a predictable compressing range, and it would require an excessive amount of mass to cause any more expansion, the good news is once this parabola tapers off and starts its period of compression, we'll be able to very reliably predict Bitcoin's direction for that short period of time. And by short period, I mean a solid 3-month period, right? From where we defined the bottom to this breakout here, we had 108 days of smooth free sailing, mean reversion positions, lateral chop, and altcoin longs, right? This compressing market here is one of the easiest places to trade in a bear market, where we have these extensive periods of trend, and compression. Trend and compression. And now we're getting trend, and soon enough, we will get compression. Now, we are unable to currently define those mean reversion pivots until our distributional width expands to the correct longest over expanded periods, right? And one thing we can do is still, again, look at that 3.2 standard deviation and look for some kind of bearish confirmation candle. Then again, that is going to be a ridiculously high risk position. And there have been no cross mean reversion pivots, and this is true trend. Here on the 4-hour chart, it's currently the 160 period. Let me just give you an example of how far away the mean reversion pivots are. Okay. You see this right here? In order for me to consider this uptrend over at this time, price would need to retrace over 20%. However, the good news is, if we actually flag it out here, or maybe a little bit higher, a little bit lower, that's fine. This mean reversion pivot is rapidly climbing in price, and eventually I predicted about by the 20th, price will either be forced to enter the band or continue trend. And due to the apparent exhaustion on the daily chart because of the extreme values we're tagging, as soon as we have that confirmed compressionary period, things are going to be really peachy for us. Now, what's important to note is in the previous downward expansion, when we did get the bullish confirmation candle, trend could still technically continue because lateral trading is loosely defined before you actually cross your relative mean reversion pivots. So, when do I think we're going to start consolidating again? Well, the pivots are currently not yet defined. You have to wait that one out, unfortunately. Okay? So, be patient. Look for altcoins to short. You know, every time we have a swing high on an altcoin, you get plenty of good opportunities to short. Like 4-hour on the quad CCI. Every time we get a CCI roll down, there's a very high profit ratio short position available to us. I know Curve has been shorting since this location, and I'm sure he's rather enjoying himself. And pretty much the only winning call this month has been Litecoin. And, well, I'm very happy with it. We started our short around this location. We are currently up 17-18%. And do I think this is a fake out to shake out the weekends? Not quite. This is still part of the crash pattern, I believe. We're still in a compressionary period. And I don't really know who we'd be shaking out at this point. We're still in a long-term compressionary period. And guess what, guys? If I'm wrong and the bull run does start here, cool. I might actually prefer that. Right? Because if we have true parabolic trend, let me tell you, I won't be complaining about the small amount of money I missed out here if we're seeing this. Right, guys? So I'm predicting what's rational, what's hopefully more probable. And if I'm wrong, well, it just means we'll be entering a market condition that allows for much easier gains. So I kind of see it as a win-win right now. Even if I'm wrong, we're going to enter a market condition where it's going to be really easy to make money anyway. So always a silver lining. And one thing I do want to point out over here, oops, let's actually take a look at the BLX chart. Okay, so watch this. We're actually going to do the weekly chart and look at the weekly 50 MA. Okay. And the 200. Beautiful. And we're going to switch to logarithmic. Whenever you have zero values or below zero values on a logarithmic chart, you get these droopy paintings. It's very fun. So, even though we didn't reject from this weekly 50 MA here and test down to the weekly 200, well, my condition for a bullish scenario was a breakout, either a retest of the weekly 200 or a break above, a sustained move above the weekly 50, which was seen here. And, well, we're getting a sustained move above the weekly 50. Actually, this is pretty cool to look at. You see what I see? Even though this compressionary period was far shorter than the previous one, which is pretty bizarre given the long-term logarithmic curve of Bitcoin, that's what I don't like about this, guys. We have this long-term logarithmic trend, right? Where we have these shorter cycles slowly getting longer and longer and longer, right? Where the first bullish and bearish cycle lasted 78 bars. The second one, actually, I should define it by crash patterns, yeah? Okay. So until it's back above the weekly 50 EMA, we'll do it, right? So first we have 350 days. Next up we have 686 days, right? And then it's logical to assume that the next period is going to be shorter, or excuse me, longer, but it was in fact shorter. I expected another 3 months of compression. It's pretty bizarre because there's been so much bearish fundamental news. Like the largest exchange is damn near insolvent and people are going to get arrested because they're missing close to $1 billion. Like they gave their money to a money laundering, I was going to say corporation, but it's not quite right. All right, they had their money laundered instead of doing a bank because no bank would accept them. And I think one important note here is the compression itself. So even if we assume the most bullish scenario, where price in fact does not retrace and it just flags out, which I think is actually possible now, right, where we had the break above the weekly 50, we had an accelerated parabola that really got smacked down pretty hard, and then we went through a period of compression. right? And so the same would make sense because we still need the compression of our long-term distributions. And if we wanted to, or rather if the market makers wanted to paint a bullish scenario, it really would be best to do so by allowing this compression to take over through a lateral move over a longer period. And then when we start seeing secondary higher highs, where we have this compression and then the second higher high, that'll be the bull run. Alternatively, we could see a full retest the weekly 200 if Bitfinex really does crash and burn. And then further compression and then the bull run. But this is certainly not the time to buy Bitcoin, I can say that much. Okay? All right, friends, this has been a pleasure. I will talk to you all tomorrow, 1 p.m. MST. You have a beautiful day.